All right. I've been told that we are recording, which is absolutely fantastic. Um, this, let's put this on mute. Let's make sure. Oh, I'll just wait for this post to load. I might play this and I might not. I might do my best interpretation of just reciting it as much as I know, because that's really all you can do anyway. I've been watching a lot of. I've been watching a lot of like old school McGregor, a lot of Marco Pierre White. And I'm sure this sounds like two completely different worlds at the moment, but they have a lot of parallels, trust me. A lot of Marco Pierre White. And if you don't know who Marco Pierre White is, he's a Michelin star, or used to be Michelin star chef. I think he was. I don't know the specific terminology, if it's hatted, that they are hatted, or the restaurant. But he owned a restaurant. I think it had 3 Michelin stars, and very successful chef in his own right. And then also mentor to who would become Gordon Ramsay as you know him today, and a bunch of other guys. And there's a really cool video, I want to say about 30 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. They look so young in the video. Probably about 20, 25, maybe 30 years ago. And he's got this ragtag crew. There's about 5 dudes in the kitchen, and one of them's Gordon Ramsay. You see young face Gordon. He must be like 19 or something in the video. And then he goes around to the other guys, and he's basically saying, like, this guy's been with me for 2 weeks. He's a legend, and this guy's really taken initiative. And you can tell he really gives a shit about the people he's working with. And obviously he's had some instances of blow-ups and kicking people out of his restaurants, which I respect heavily. He was talking about a situation where these people were coming to the restaurant, they were complaining and they were whinging, and they were just being absolutely horrible customers. And you get this sometimes. When you're in a business, sometimes you're just going to run into people that suck. Just quite frankly, it's just human nature. Eventually you'll find someone that you don't like, and there's nothing really particular about it. Maybe it's their behavior sometimes, maybe it's the look on their face, and everybody does it. You just look at them and you're like, okay, yeah, fair enough. It's just going to be the way you're going to act. And it's whether your personalities clash or something like that. It's going to happen. And he ends up kicking these people out. And he just said they were rude, they were abrasive, they were demanding of staff in ways that were very impolite, like pointing, clicking, doing that sort of stuff. And that's just, I hate when people do that at restaurants. It's completely unnecessary. You don't own the staff. The staff are there to serve you as part of the experience of being at the restaurant. You don't own them. And your life and your meal gets 10 times better. The experience of the meal, like the ambience within the restaurant, and then also the food and so on and so forth, gets 10 times better when you walk in with a smile and you shake their hand and say, hi, how are you? And so on. And I do this at a couple of places that I go to quite frequently. And the guys at this one restaurant, they always save me and my missus this one table. Or rather, if it's ready and no one's, it's saved, I think, for special occasions, maybe if they have walk-ins or something like that. But we always get the same table, and we're about to be walked. The maitre d' at the front was somebody I hadn't seen before. She must be new. And we're about to be walked outside. It was quite cold, rainy. And the manager there saw me. And he goes, dude, what are you doing? Your fucking table's ready. And it's because, A, we go there all the time. But B, when we do go there, we make an effort to put all the plates together so shit isn't scattered everywhere. We leave it neat and orderly. We don't click and demand, and everyone's greeted as they greet us. Handshake, smile, all the jazz. And because they're humans. They're not servants. They're people that are feeding their families via hospitality. And then that's it. That's all it really comes down to. And so for you to try and like claim ownership over them I didn't start the timer. Oh well. To try and claim ownership over them and see yourself in a hierarchical position is fucking stupid. It's a bit arrogant too. But yeah, Marco Pierre White has a phenomenal mindset and an outlook on these things, and it mimics a lot of old school McGregor stuff, and it also mimics a lot of this Eastern philosophy that I've been reading as well, in terms of competition. We'll get into that a little bit after. But Marco Pierre White has this video where he's talking about, he goes, "You're just the cook. You're not the person who's creating the ingredients. You're utilizing the ingredients, and obviously you have to be the one that organizes them and puts them together in a specific way that produces a taste that would be beneficial to the person eating said food." And he says, but Mother Nature's really doing the work. She's the one who's preparing the ingredients so that you can use them. And if it weren't for that, your skills wouldn't exist. And I think that's a really beautiful way to look at a creative process, even in competition, because competition is a creative process. At least the way that I'm starting to look at it more and more so, instead of looking at it as domination and crushing the other person and that sort of thing. Because in competition, I can't do what I do without the other guy. I can't compete against myself. And if I can't do what I do without the other person, then the foundational basis of respect, of appreciation, of willingness to wish them their best and hope that they come at their best so that you can perform at your best and get the best out of each other. You don't want to trample somebody who can't fight back. There's no challenge for you. There was a really good image that I saw today on Instagram, and it was a graph like this, and it had the challenge on the y-axis. I think the y is I don't remember. Challenge on this axis, on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, it had skills. And in the middle, it's got this parallel lines. These parallel lines through the segment, like a 45-degree angle. And then it has inside the parallel lines at the very top, where you've got maximum skill, maximum challenge. You've got flow state, because it requires the most out of you, and it transforms your brain in a way that you can't be analytical. You can't analyze the situation. You just have to act and trust, and have this trust in the environment, in the skill set that you've been creating, in your capacity as an individual to react in certain situations and find solutions to problems. And there's something other than you doing it. It's your unconscious mind, or it's God, or whatever you want to call it, but it is something other than you. And I think this is what Marco Pierre White's talking about when he talks about Mother Nature's the thing that's creating the meal, not you. You're just the preparer. You're the organizer, basically. And I've taken that to mean, specifically for me in my competing and the way that I approach things, I'm not really the one applying the techniques. It's something that's coming through me that allows me to perform. And the only time you don't perform to your best is when you specifically get stuck in this ego trap where, well, I know best, and I know that I'm going to have this outcome, and I'm going to be very attached to that, and that means I'm going to be steadfast in one direction, and I can never steer away from that, never veer away from that, and never deviate. Because if I deviate, then I won't get the thing that I say that I want most, without the understanding that the unknown contains things that you don't want, but also contains things that are better than you're possibly imagining right now. And that's something to be considered, because most people only assume the worst of the unknown. They only have a fundamental belief that if it's something they don't know, if it's something they are uncertain about, then it must be negative and it must be leading them to destruction, which isn't true, because you guys watching at the moment have partners that you didn't meet, that were unknown to you. You hadn't met them yet. And now you're in a relationship with them, and you've got kids and you're married and these sorts of things. And if you dispelled all of the unknown in the potentiality that it was simply just going to be bad, then you never would have taken the chance on them. You never would have opened that channel up to facilitate a relationship in the first place, which has given you many benefits. Yes, of course, gives you challenges, so on, but also given you many benefits. And there's something to be considered a lot. And to go back to this competition sense, how do you know that your way is best? With your limited understanding, your limited view, and your limited perspective that's only pertaining to you. Your unconscious mind is fucking incredible, and it is absolutely fascinating to think about, which is kind of an oxymoron, because you can think about your unconscious mind, but it's unconscious, you can't really get to it, but you can in certain capacities get to it. You can feed things into it. And right now, while you're listening to this show, it is pumping blood around your body. It's breathing. It's creating skin cells and ligaments and tendons and fibers and rebuilding tissues. It's supporting your immune system. It's digesting things. It is producing all of these autonomic functions without you even thinking about it. And obviously you can't think about it, because you would go absolutely insane with all the things you already have to do. But I think when you experience the worst part of performance is when you don't trust that process. Like right now, it's doing millions of things without your say-so. And so it's taking on a lot more data than you ever could. It's organizing a lot of things that you never could. It knows things that you don't. So just based on that logic, would it not be a good idea to allow it to be the thing that you see performing, not you specifically? So it becomes this otherworldly process. Like Ilya Tapuria does a lot of this as well, and it mimics a lot of what McGregor has said in the past, where he speaks about, he's obviously, I think he's Orthodox Christian, but he talks about God fighting through him. And there's a good quote I listened to yesterday. It was, he doesn't work for you, he works with and through you. And if you listen to that properly, you understand what it means, because you can't just beg for things and have them happen, because it won't happen. You can ask for guidance for your actions and then act within that guidance. That are two very separate things. And it's a really cool thing to think about as well, because a lot of people get caught up in the fact that it really feels, life sometimes really feels like a one-person race. And sometimes it feels like you're up against everything, up against the wall. And this is happening, and this is happening, and this is falling apart, and this is going wrong, and all that jazz. And there's a lot of people that dive further into, there's a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and he calls it Mind 1, Mind 2, or Self 1, Self 2. They dive into the Self 1 part, where that's a very conscious, analytical mind. And this will be a really good analogy to explain what I'm about to talk about. He said, Mind 1 or Self 1 people hyperfixate on tools to solve what's going on. So they look for stress management, and therefore they actually assume that stress is going to be inevitable, rather than shifting gears and thinking about self too, which has the ability to look at all of the perspective and think about, instead of focusing on stress management, where I'm navigating towards dealing with stress that I believe to be inevitable by proxy of looking for tools to deal with things, then instead of that, why don't I look for stability? Why don't I look for methods to return my focus inwards? And that way, what you focus on will grow. If you're focusing on stress management tools, or the fact that you are stressed and you have to deal with it, the stress will grow, because you wouldn't need to deal with it if you didn't have it. And so your unconscious mind goes, yep, okay, let's deal with that stress. There has to be stress to deal with. So you see that conundrum you get into. Whereas if you turn your fixation to stability, you go, okay, all right, let's look for ways to be stable. Sweet. And the way that this marries in, and obviously Timothy Galway does a much better job of explaining it than I do. The way this marries into the Marco Pierre Ilya Tapuria sort of realm is that they're putting their trust and their faith into something other than them, and seeing themselves just as a facilitator, not as like the be all and the end all. So you drop that anxiety, you drop that pressure, you drop that necessitation of outcome being fixed in one way or another. And Tapuria said, he said, if my dreams don't come true, it's because they were going to destroy me. So he destroys my dream instead, rather than destroying me. And he goes, if that day comes, then I know I will be protected from something in my future where I may have taken my interpretation of what it was, rather than God and his belief. And it's really interesting, because if you were to take, you're like, well, I know best. I know better than Mother Nature. I can force this food to be what it is. And of course, there are gastronomy techniques that can manipulate flavor and change things, but you can't overcome nature. You always see that in the sci-fi representations of when humans eventually stop existing, and then the trees grow back through all the buildings. I think they usually show New York in this example, but the trees basically take over all the human structures and then eat them away and erode them, and nature always wins. And I think that your unconscious always wins too. Like that's your nature. That's everything that encompasses all of your experiences, all of the things within your upbringing, all of the circumstances you've been within, and that usually guides where you end up most of the time. You hear most people talk about this in the mental modeling world, in the self-development world, in the hypnosis world, in the Joe Dispenzas, the Dr. John DeMartinis, and these sorts of guys, the Tony Robbins. And they always talk about even was it Carl Jung? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll guide your life, and you'll call it fate. Fascinating concept. And I think it really is. And if you look into the psychology of it, I try not to steer too much towards modern psychology. I'm much more of a Jung fan than I am a Freud fan, among many, many reasons. I won't go into it today, but I think where was I going with that? Talking about the unconscious becoming conscious. I've completely minced my words there, but even on the topic of that, like that conversation, looking into the dark side. Oh, that's where I was going with it. So, as far as I understand it, Freud's whole ideology is like your upbringing defines you, and there's a lot to do with the things that you've been through, and they're kind of locked in. You kind of got to figure out why it happened and the way you think you do, and Jung's ideology is much so that you have your light side and your shadow side, and there's certain elements of your shadow that are ingrained or learned behaviors, and they come about in various ways. And if you refuse to look at them, then they do a lot of the guiding of what your behaviors seem to be. But if you look at them, you realize that they're not actually that scary. You realize that they're not actually that powerful, and you start to integrate it within the whole. You're like, oh, okay, well, I have a tendency to get really angry when these types of things happen. But that was just a mechanism that used to save me from X, Y, and Z, because that's the only thing I knew how to do. And so if that's the case and that danger is no longer present, well, then I can sort of become more integrated in understanding that and recognize that A, anger isn't bad. It's actually expected in that situation based on the things that I've been through. And it's actually just a survival mechanism that I learned. And so you could reduce it those two ways by not judging yourself for it, and then also recognizing that it's completely understandable as to why you have that reaction because of X, Y, Z. This is as far as I understand it, as far as I've read into it. And I think that the whole judgment side of things, and we're going to get into that Eastern philosophy stuff that I was talking about beforehand. The whole judgment side of things, specifically of yourself, is, well, I shouldn't be angry, or I should be better, or I should be smarter, or I should be richer than I am, or I should be in a better place. And all of that is extremely unhelpful. It doesn't really do anything to propel you forwards either. It does do a lot to stop you from moving forwards, especially when you're thinking about, let's say, posting a video, and you're like, oh, what is X and X going to think about this, and what is Y going to say, and how's Z going to take this sort of interpretation, and is it going to be good, or is it going to flop, is it going to do this? And you just sit there thinking about it so long that you never actually end up posting it, and you never find out anyway. It goes back to the unknown concept we're talking about, where you're never going to know until you do it, so you may as well just get busy doing it. And that's kind of an erosion of this self-judgment thing. I mean, you can still act and judge your actions as well. And usually that's a self-one concept, because it's the ego getting involved. It's the ego going, well, this should be better, or I need to be better. You have this in jiu-jitsu training frequently, or at least I do. Maybe I'm over speaking for a lot of people, but I coach a lot of individuals, and they say very similar things where they think, I just had the shittest session today. And you're like, okay, well, do you care to elaborate? And they're like, yeah, this went wrong and this went wrong and blah, 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 and couldn't get this to work. And I'm like, is it a ridiculous idea to assume that you did one thing and then assumed that that was then going to follow into every other thing that you did because you fucked up one move, and that became the central, the centralized focus for your session, and then you were just fighting against it? You were fighting against the fact that you just fucked up one move. Then you weren't present. You were in a past setting, which renders you completely ineffective. And then that vicious cycle going around and around and around of you thinking about the previous move being wrong, and then judging yourself for that and getting angry for that judgment, which then stops you from being effective currently, which then makes your next move worse, which feeds into the anger and feeds into the judgment, exemplifying them, or amplifying them, I should say, and then therefore ruining your next move, and then going through the cycle. You see how that works? is it fair to say, or ridiculous to assume, that that was the case? It wasn't that you couldn't get those moves to work, as it was you're so preoccupied by going, fuck, I really needed to do that better. Or this. And it's just very unhelpful to see things in that light. Even, I think it was a Tate quote. I can't remember who it was. I'm pretty sure it was Andrew Tate. And he's like, I don't regret anything I've ever done on the basis that if I believed it was the best thing to do at the time, well then, with the information that I had available to me, it was the best thing that I could have done at that time. And so for me to judge that and regret it would be kind of silly, even though I know more now. Because you're always going to know more in your life. You're always going to progress. You're always going to develop. You're always going to become better, more intelligent, or at least some people to a certain point. The Vedas have a concept that only 30 to 50% of people, that somewhere between 30 to 50% of people don't have internal monologues, don't have an ability to debate with themselves or even generate thoughts inside their own mind where they converse with themselves and they think, oh, is this a good idea, or is this something I want to pursue, or they just don't question anything. That concept blew my mind a lot. I still think about it a fair bit. And you speak to people sometimes, you're like, yeah, you don't really question anything, do you? You don't question whether that KFC is going to be good for you. You just think, oh, it tastes good, so I'll get it. Or you don't question your profession. You just go, well, this is just what this is what my dad did, and this is what his dad did, or maybe this is what is expected of me. And I don't know how true the whole concept is, 30 to 50% of people, but when you measure that against your experience of conversing with many thousands of individuals, you're kind of like, I could see it potentially being true. I don't know if it is, but I could see it potentially being true. Especially online. When you have interactions with people online, especially when they choose to remain anonymous, you see the worst of people. And this is a broader topic of conversation with anonymity being very dangerous. I was talking to one of the boys at the gym after our session today, and he was saying that his dad finds it all very strange, and he doesn't use social media or anything like that because back in the day when he grew up, I think he's probably 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. I never met the guy. But he said back in the day when you had something to say, you had to be able to back it up, because you would always find somebody that, or rather the person you said something to was there in front of you. And if they didn't like what you said, the threat of them doing something about it was pretty high. So you had to be careful with what you said, not to piss too many people off, because there were physical consequences if they were. And that's completely gone out the window with the advent of social media. There are many, 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 many positives and many benefits, but there are also many negatives. And I think people left to their own devices, in the shroud of secrecy, the covering of being anonymous, don't tend to act in a way that is with grace. They tend to choose evil when they know they have no consequences. There's a really good quote about character. It's like, what would you do if there was no threat of you ever being punished? Like, would you consider lying, cheating, stealing, killing? The 4 deadly sins, as far as I'm concerned. Would you consider it? And you pose this hypothesis. It's actually a really interesting thing to think about, because you've got to question it for yourself as well. You sit there and you think, well, if there was no threat of me ever getting punished for anything, would I go and rob a bank? It's an interesting thing to think about. Would you drive well above the speed limit all the time? Would you take things from shops? Would you say whatever you wanted? Because there's no threat of ever being punished in this hypothetical thought experiment. Really interesting to think about. And it makes you think, because you've got to question, well, what would I do and how far would I go? Because I think most people, once they get a sniff, once they get an inkling that they're going to get away with it, it's like toddlers. Toddlers aren't sitting there going, I'm going to do this to piss my mum off. They're not. They just simply aren't. They don't even have the capacity to think like that. They slap their brother or sister and then they get yelled at and they go, ooh, attention. That's the attention button. Let me keep pushing that button. So they push it again and then they get even madder. Oh, that got an even bigger reaction. Let me do that again. Sweet. They're just constantly prodding and testing and seeing what they can get away with. And they're not malicious. They're not evil. They're 2 or 4 in between those ranges. They're just doing shit. They don't know consequences yet. They have no idea. And so most people are probably more aligned to toddlers than they would otherwise admit, especially if you think about the Vedic concept, the internal monologue stuff. And would you do something? Would you do something cheeky and then find your pathway to something destructive? I don't know. It's worth thinking about. I mean, imagine this, right? You've got a boss that you really don't like, and you can't get punished for anything that you do. Do you walk in and slap him in the face? Maybe. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you think about it, you're like, oh, I wouldn't really like that to be done to me, so I probably won't do it. Fair enough. Or maybe you go, fuck that guy. I'm going to smack him because I can't get punished for it. And then you think about it and you're like, oh, okay, well, if I've got immunity, why don't I just go further and further? Why don't I just go completely more outlandish and go ridiculous? Why don't I go slap the president? I don't know. Why wouldn't you? You're not getting punished. And I think this ties into the anonymity thing, because there really isn't any punishment until you get, what's that guy's name? I completely forget his name. He's like, hey, buddy, what are you doing? And he talks about companies that are still making weapons and shit, that they're like a food company, but then they make poisons and all this crazy stuff. He's got a really good page. I wish I remember what it was. He is a internet cybersecurity specialist, I think. He shows his degree all the time. And these guys try and scam him. And he like gets their IP address and finds out where they are and then sends it to them. And then they shit bricks and like, oh, shit, they found us. Until you get caught like that, you're probably just going to keep running it. Eventually you get done. Maybe you don't. But without that threat, without that threat of repercussions, they're probably just going to keep acting in a way that they see fit, rather than the right way. What even is the right way? But the Eastern philosophy thing, there's a video I watched it just before to refresh, and very Bruce Lee type of. He calls it concentrated. Is it concentrated non-attachment? Let me have a look. I might just play it for you, because otherwise I will definitely butcher word for word. Oh, okay. You don't want to show me? Sorry, 1 second. Instagram always takes forever when you go to your saved section. I'm not sure really why. Or the archived section just takes ages. Okay, let's listen to this.
Principle might sound contradictory at first. Second principle might sound contradictory at first. I call it engaged detachment. To be fully committed to the present action while remaining completely unconcerned with its outcome. In 1967, I participated in a karate tournament in Long Beach. Before my match, I observed my opponent pacing, rehearsing moves, visualizing victory. His desire to win created tension in his body, narrowed his vision. When we faced each other, something unusual happened. As he attacked with intense determination to defeat me, I found myself in a state I hadn't planned, completely present, yet strangely detached. I was fully engaged in each movement, every block, every strike executed with total commitment. Yet simultaneously I held no attachment to winning or losing. This paradoxical state allowed me to see openings invisible to him, to respond without the delay of thought or the hesitation of fear. This principle applies far beyond combat. Consider how attachment to outcomes affects your daily life. When you desperately need a particular result, your body tenses, your mind narrows, your breathing becomes shallow. You become blind to alternatives, deaf to subtle information. Many believe detachment means not caring, being passive or indifferent. This misses the point entirely. True detachment isn't about caring less. It's about clinging less. You can care deeply about what you do while releasing your grip on how things must turn out. In my film work, I discovered this same principle. The scenes that worked best weren't when I focused on impressing the audience, but when I immersed myself completely in the moment with no concern for how I would be perceived. Total engagement with the action, total detachment from its reception. Here's a practice I developed. Before any important event, I ask myself, can I give everything to this moment while holding nothing about its outcome? This shifts my energy from the future, which doesn't exist, to the present, which is the only place power resides. Engaged detachment creates a curious freedom. When you're no longer constrained by the need for things to unfold in a specific way, you discover an expansive power to respond to what actually is. Your mind becomes like a skilled sailor who works with whatever wind arises. Second.
So fucking cool. Very, very, very interesting to think about in terms of the application as well. Not just, like you said, not just in combat, but also in life. Like doing what you want to do completely and wholly obsessed and engaged within the process, irrespective of what you may get out of it, who may judge you as a result of it. And getting really with it. Alan Watts talks about this practice that he used to embody this philosophy with. And he was saying, when you're doing dishes, and when you're washing one dish, just wash one dish. It sounds very ambiguous. It sounds as though he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he does. And when you really break it down and you think about it properly, he's not concerning himself with the previous dishes that have been done and how many he's completed and torturing himself for the time that he's been spent at the sink completing that task. And he's also not looking forwards into the future at the dirty mess that lie before him that he will have to commit more time to and take more time out away from other activities. He simply washes the dish that's in front of him. And then as soon as he's finished that one, then he washes the next one. And it just complete whole obsession with complete focus just in the one thing that's going on presently. And as the video said, presence is where all the power exists. Because if you're preoccupied with past and future, you may be inclined to think things like, well, if I do that, I will get tired. And if I get tired, then I won't be as effective. And when I'm not as effective, I'm more likely to lose. And see all these things that you're now preoccupied with focusing on and hanging on to. I think the thing that prevents most people from achieving what they want is this risk aversion, this avoidance of loss, the necessity to avoid losing as much as humanly possible, and being rigid and brittle, stagnant as a result of that, and really narrowing your window of opportunity. Well, because I can't do that because then I'll lose. I have this conversation with people a lot when they say, well, what, like, how did you quit your job and how did you start doing what you're doing? Weren't you scared? And I was like, yeah, but that's not the point. You just do it anyway. It's like, without no risk, there is no reward. The only risky thing, Jim Rohn, the only risky thing is not risking anything at all, because it's all risky. Not taking any risk is the highest risk. Never betting on yourself, never backing yourself, that's the highest risk. And Jim Carrey, I've spoken about this at length. There's another video that come up recently. His dad was a brilliant saxophone player, had an orchestra in Canada. But when you had an orchestra in Canada, it wasn't really like that big of a deal. Like, you were kind of doing it, but you needed to go to the States and prove yourself. And that terrified him. And he also had a young family to feed. So all power to him. I completely understand why he made the decision that he did. And he got a job as an accountant. And apparently he was like brilliantly funny too. Like a real comedian, like a real fun, joyful individual to be around. And Jim said that the accounting job just beat him down. And at 51, he was let go from the accounting job, and that really broke him, he said. He said the reason it really broke him is because he bet the safe path and still failed. He didn't take the risk doing what he wanted to love. And it's not as brutal when you fail doing what you love. It's not as confronting, because at least you were doing the thing that you wanted to do, and you were more process oriented than you were outcome based. And I think that's the real secret of getting with something, is just being wholly engrossed within the process and really letting it take you away. And there's moments within the age of social media, and this is something I'm wrestling with at the moment, of how destructive it actually is, and whether you go into the origins of why and who's doing it, or it doesn't really matter. An interesting point on this is that Steve Jobs didn't allow his kids to use it. Didn't allow his kids to use iPhones, iPads, whatever. Fascinating. Just throwing it out there. Most of the tech billionaire guys don't let their kids use shit either. And you have to wonder why. And you have to wonder, what is your, see if you guys can answer this. What is your most valuable resource? Most valuable. If you could converge all of your most valuable resource to one thing, and you've done it many, 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 many times in your life, underneath certain pressures or underneath certain circumstances where you just had to get something done. Is it money? Is it time? Is it strength? All of those could be very useful in a situation like that. Or is it focus and attention to the correct things as well? So focusing on the objective side of what is actually in front of you, and the present tense awareness, not counting your chickens or counting your eggs before they've laid. Not getting too big for your boots too quickly. Cashing, writing checks you can't cash. That sort of thing. And if you do, I've done this many times in my life, where you think that, this will just go ad infinitum, it'll just go forever. Sweet. It's going to go upward trend. I did it with TikTok first, I think. Probably the most poignant memory recently is where I gained, I think, 15,000 followers in a day from one video. And I just extrapolated that out, and I went, 15,000 a day. Well, in 60 days, it'll be at 1 million followers. And I'm like, sweet, I'll just keep posting this. Then obviously the next video did like 4,000 views instead of 10 million. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm back to square one. I'm back to where I was yesterday. And it's quite funny, you play these games with yourself, and you play these games on the opposite end of the spectrum as well, with the negative things. And you think, oh, wow, this negative thing, this is really going to be a downward trend if it keeps continuing. And it's just going to be really bad. And it's going to end up in me doing all these things, and then I might die. We always extrapolate to death. I've spoken about that at length, which isn't true. And even if it is true, Hormozy said this cool thing the other day. It's like, even if it is true and it does kill you, it's not going to be your problem anymore because you'd be dead. So it's not really a problem, actually. It's just one of those things. It's one of those things that we trap ourselves into thinking about and torture ourselves with what ifs, hypotheses, theories, and fairy tales inside our own mind. And if you can just practice the idea of objectively maintaining the present, it's very difficult to do in today's day and age, like we've been speaking about. But I think it's such an influential skill. And Timothy Galway talks about it in The Inner Game of Tennis, where he says, you can train your focus to get better at tennis, but that's outcome-based thinking. It's very self-one oriented. It's, well, how do I get a better forehand, or how do I get a better backhand? And focusing on those two things will get you better results. But he goes, the opposite of that is playing tennis to enhance your focus, which will then be internal, self-to oriented, and benefit you in many other aspects of your life. And he talks about, I almost killed this stopwatch. He talks about looking at it that way. And instead of thinking about your form or anything like that, he goes, focus on the noise of the ball hitting the court. Just listen. Just allow your senses to do what they do naturally. You don't have to force yourself to hear something. And in fact, when you try and listen, you usually fail. When you try and look, you usually fail because you're trying too hard. You're just getting in the way of the natural process. Don't get in the way of it. And he goes, when you listen for the ball, you're not worried about your footwork or the angle of the racket face or how loose or firm your wrist is. You're just paying attention. And he goes, if that's not for you, use your eyes. Pay attention to the seams of the ball. That's it. Nothing else. Seams of the ball. And he goes, this way you're playing tennis to enhance your focus. And the way that that blooms out into other areas of your life is that you're becoming internally guided and you're becoming process oriented. And you're also leveraging your senses, which we don't usually do a lot of anymore. Very rarely do we sit in a quiet place and just absorb all of the sounds that are currently going on. Like right now, I'm obviously speaking, but there are birds outside. Nick has a bird cage just outside. And if I was to sit here in silence and just listen, see what comes up. Like I can hear a printer or some sort of electronic just humming in the background. Couldn't hear that before I just started paying attention. And if you take the visual apparatus, like you actually just open your gaze and look for all the details. There was a practice, it was a philosopher or a psychologist or someone, I can't remember. He spoke about your practice, your first test this semester is to look at a painting for 3 hours unbroken. No phones, no distraction, no music, no conversation, no talking to yourself, no talking to anybody else. 3 hours. focus on a painting. And he said that the students came back with these wonderful assessments of the way that the strokes had changed and formed and developed, and the imagery that starts to become available when you really deeply look at something and nothing else. You're forced to discover all of these details that start to come at you. And building that type of focus can only enhance your life. Like, imagine you could just hold focus for 2 hours. What would you put it on? You can do it, by the way. You prove it every single day. Whether you're paying a large amount of attention or not, your focus and attention is being deployed into this every day without you noticing. And you look at your screen time and you're like, shit. I might even buy one of those brick things because they look pretty fucking useful at the moment. Stay the fuck away from the phone. I've gone back into reading recently. I'm reading A Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. I'm also reading Very Good Copy. I forget the author's name, but it was a recommendation from an old business mentor of mine, Mark. Great fucking guy. Really, really great fucking guy. You know when you have a conversation with somebody and you know him pretty well, but this is obviously excluding people you don't know that well, because they kind of wouldn't be able to ask you the same questions with the same sincerity. Some people do. Some people have a very, very good social cohesion where they get to that point quite quickly. I've met a ton of those people. But Mark really gets to the depth of asking you important things. And he wants to be interested in what you're interested in, because that interests him. That's one of his best qualities. He does a really good job at that. And he tries to learn from you. He genuinely is interested in the way that you think, and he tries to learn from you. And it's not about Sermon on the Mount, just spouting forth his ideas or anything like that. And he goes, yeah, what are you actually doing with this? And how did you come to that assessment of that being the play? And how did you figure that out? And he wants to learn from you. It's really fascinating to sit and talk with someone like that. And I'm trying to be better at that. I should just be better. I shouldn't be trying to be better. I should just shut the fuck up and listen to people, because people can teach you innumerable things, and from unexpected places too. Unexpected places. Like the amount that I learn from hospitality staff about human nature and psychology is unreal. They have a very good understanding. Very good understanding. And whether they're conscious of it or not, I think that's the most interesting thing. It just goes back to this self-too idea that it really is an unconscious acceptance, maybe. They pick up little cues and habits and idiosyncrasies about certain people. And even Arthur the other day, one of the baristas, he's actually the brother of my favorite barista, Manny. And when I sit at that cafe, I have 2 coffees. I have one before lunch and one after lunch. And I'll take the lid off, like one of these ones. I'll take the lid off and then I'm so autistic. I get a fruit salad, I get a coffee, I have that before my food gets there, and then I eat the main meal, which is like a sandwich thing, and then I have the next coffee. And sit down, the table number, fruit salad, pop the lid off the fruit salad, lid off the coffee, lid of the fruit salad underneath, coffee lid underneath, and then fruit salad on top, because it's windy there sometimes outdoors. I don't want it blowing away. And then I'll drink the coffee without the lid on it, because they don't do dine-in cups. They don't do mugs or anything like that. It's just takeaway cups, which from a convenience perspective is genius, because they don't have to wash them. I think it might cost them less than it would take in the time to wash them. And then also it's less expensive for the cups initially, obviously, and then over time you just end up spending. I don't know. Chad's a very smart guy. Probably figured all that out well in advance. I trust him that he knows what he's doing. Then Arthur looked at me yesterday and he goes, you want to start making that without a lid? And I was like, huh. Yeah, I thought about that on Tuesday, funnily enough. Sort of like a synchronicity type thing. And I was like, yeah, you could do that. Because I'm just taking it to the table and drinking it out of the fucking cup anyway. But to notice that, they've got to be switched on. And although they're busy doing things, like grind, pour, froth, or texture, if you're a coffee snob. I completely forget what the snob word is for the process of draining the shot. I'm completely forgetting it. I used to know all this stuff when I was in the industry. There were like cupping. Cupping is this process where you taste the different nodes and notes of the beans, and the two different things. I can't remember what they were called, or why they were called that. Nodes and notes. Nodes, notes. And something to do with the aroma, the way that it plays with your nervous system and your sensory apparatus, and you can manipulate certain flavors by brewing it longer. So some flavors are like 28 seconds, hard line, don't ever go after it. And then some are like towards 30, 35. And I think it's the darker roasts, the more chocolatey sort of deep flavors are like the longer ones, and then the fruity ones are the shorter term ones. I think that's what I remember anyway. But there's a whole world to it. And so they're doing all that. Maybe not. Maybe that's just me being retarded. But they're doing all that and then also noticing those little things. And I think it's an interesting way to look at it, because even though you're busy, you can't be self-one in a high-paced environment like that. You have to be in self-two. You have to almost be in some sort of autopilot. Like you watch the Ayrton Senna documentary, and he speaks very vividly about being in a tunnel when he was racing in, I think it was 1993 Monaco. I was in a tunnel and I was unconscious completely. Because if you were consciously analyzing every little turn and every little adjustment that you had to make, you'd have to slow yourself down. There's no way you can go at the speeds that he was going at and be taking in all that data, assessing it, and then making your next move. There's no way. It has to be an unconscious process. And it's fascinating to think about. And obviously they're different worlds, like F1 driving and baristing, if that's what it's called. But it's so interesting to think about. You can get to these levels of awareness and states quite quickly, quite easily, just based in ordinary tasks. But I think for me, that's kind of like the goal of training and of competition. It's not world championships, it's not medals, it's not all these things. It's self-development, self-expression. And the truest form of self-expression is the one where you have no hang-ups, the one where you have no considerations for the outcomes, the afterthoughts, the reactions, the responses. It's just there presently. Complete presence. And I think ways to claw that back, at least what I'm trying to think about, staying the fuck away from this thing as much as humanly possible. But going back to reading, forcing yourself to look at things in a much slower pace, forcing yourself to rekindle some sort of curiosity away from the hyper, maybe hyper is not the right word, but the complete abduction of your most valuable resource. I think that's the way I'm going to put it. Because I don't know about you guys, but I sit and think sometimes that it's kind of overwhelming. There's so much to learn. And the way that I teach jiu-jitsu is opposite to this. I try and teach it in a weekly structure where You're only allowed to focus on a few things at once. And I really think that's the key. And I think that most people who are brilliant do that. They only focus on a few things. They get real into the weeds on a couple of topics. I think you kind of have to have excellence, because you realize getting excellent at something takes so much effort, so much energy, so much consistency, so much focus. And you can't do it for many things. You really can't at that level. You can be average at a shitload of stuff because it doesn't take that much. But to be excellent, to be good at something, takes so much. And I think when you recognize that, you realize how important it is to stay focused on the things that you do want to do, and how developing that skill is so beneficial across many, many, many other facets of your life. And if you can develop that and find ways to, like I was saying before, claw that back away from the things that are stealing your attention. What could you bring about? What could you create? What could you evolve past that you're currently not able to because of this? Like, if you didn't take in 500 reels a day, instead of like, oh, this thing's so interesting, and then this thing's so interesting, and this thing's so, even if it's in a learned manner, even if it's in like following the news or something less violent, like you get into mindset content, for instance, and you listen to 7 different interpretations on the same thing, and you're like, well, is this guy right? Is this guy right? Is this guy right? Like, you listen to a Westerner's idea of mindset and the best way to apply yourself, and then you listen to the Eastern version, and you're like, oh, they're contradictory. I wonder who's right. And then you're worried about who's right rather than just taking on as it is, applying. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't take on different opinions or different outlooks, but I'm saying, like, once you kind of find your thing to go deep on, just do that. And then just use it to practice focus. And what's the actor's name? The Green Goblin. Willem Dafoe? No, it's not, is it? Who's the Green Goblin? Actor who played Green Goblin. It is Willem Dafoe. Wow, there you go. Good job. He said, he goes, just plan to do something poorly. Plan for it to be shit when you first start. Start writing and plan for it to suck. But just do it. Just get with it a little bit. Plan to paint and plan for it to be shit. It takes the edge off a little bit, because you're not expecting it to be great on its. You're not expecting to be Da Vinci your first time picking up a brush. And I think we kind of think like that because we're getting shoved down our faces that everybody who's 21 who doesn't have fucking Lambos and $7 million in their account is a loser. And it's just not true at all. There has to be some space for that. And people these days are very quick to jump on bandwagons and really dive on in a failure moment. This is a big cancer culture thing at the moment where people are just like, well, yeah, fuck that guy. Like, he fucked up, failed, did this thing. He's a loser, blah, blah, blah. Like, people would lose a Super Bowl and they're like, yeah, my team sucks, fuck, bleh. And you're like, first of all, what the fuck have you done? I'll answer it. Nothing. Armchair commentary. But where's the space for that? And if you think like that, at people who are succeeding at the top level in like losing a Super Bowl, they're pretty fucking up there in terms of achievement. What are you like stopping yourself from doing at the lowest level? You're like, oh, well, I could never put a photo on Instagram to try and get, a message across because it just would end badly. It would just fail. And that's for something so small, but that's because you're holding yourself to the expectation that it should be good. Don't. Plan for things to fucking blow up sometimes. Just plan for things to suck sometimes. It's gonna happen. Don't have that be your only plan, but make space for it. Make space to say dumb shit. Make space to have things blow up in your face when you try a new endeavor. When you go into a new territory and you decide to finally quit your job and go do something you actually enjoy. Allow that. Because if you don't, you're going to be very outcome driven. You're going to be fixated on one thing, and you'll end up in very destructive behaviors because you say that it has to be this one way, or it has to be this thing that is eventuated from my actions. And if it isn't, well, then I've wasted my time and I'm a failure and I'm a this, I'm a that. What about the detachment? Not that you don't care, but that you will do it anyway, even if it does fail. It's a very cool idea. A very cool idea. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with jiu-jitsu. Like, I fucking really enjoyed doing it. It's something that is completely captivating when you're doing it. Like, training is the best. Training's fucking sick. So much fun. And you just constantly delivered problems. And sometimes someone puts you in a situation you haven't been in a long time, and you just respond with shit you haven't used in ages because you haven't been put in that situation, but you know exactly what to do next. And this is when you're not in this self-one ego mind where you're judging everything that you do, and if it's shit and it doesn't work, like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to get frustrated. It's a really cool thing for me specifically that breaks down these walls of thought and action. And you see yourself doing it like a third person perspective, and you see yourself responding and acting. You're like, wow, I didn't even know I could do that. It's fucking really cool. So I recommend most people try it. Obviously, it might not be your thing. It might be like my friend Connor, a good mate of mine, who just ended up quitting jiu-jitsu for wrestling, dislocating his elbow, coming back from that, and then going, fuck wrestling. I'm going to go do Muay Thai. And he's found his rhythm with Muay Thai. It's really cool to watch. He's had a couple fights now, and it's just, that's his thing. That's the thing that he's obsessed with. And it was because he had the grace and the acceptance to allow himself to try things, realize he didn't like him or he didn't get with them all that much, and then go to the next with no hang-ups of like, oh, well, I said I was going to do jiu-jitsu, so I have to be the jiu-jitsu guy. No, you don't. You don't at all. Should hold those things very loosely, those ideas very loosely, and be malleable and go with the flow. And again, it's not to say that you shouldn't care about things, or you shouldn't strive for things, or you shouldn't persist and use grit to get through certain things, but having that breadth, that allowance for unexpected things to happen you didn't know could happen, and rolling with it. You never know which wave's going to come. You just better be fucking skilled enough to ride it. Same thing with the sailor. You don't pray for favorable winds. You pray for the skills to deal with them, even if they're not. It's a good way to end. Anyway, always a pleasure. Never a chore. Hopefully you enjoyed. Peace.